So I think the process of getting to where we are has been so much a part of personal prayer. Okay, God, we were going to say yes, but now we need you to catch us.
This is the Prayer Culture Podcast. All right, welcome to the Prayer Culture Podcast. We are live on site at the Plants Houston Conference for the Houston Church Planting Network. We are just so excited to be here. There are so many church planters here who just have a heart for taking the gospel to every part of Houston. Houston's a very diverse city. People from all over the world are coming here. And so we just love the heart of all these church planters, and Tier 1 wants to support them in prayer. So today we decided, hey, we're going to interview some people who are excited about planting as well. And we have Joseph on today. He is a church planting resident with HCPN. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your vision and your calling.
Yeah, so my wife and I, Emily, got 3 kids. And really my story is 15 years ago, about 14, 15 years ago, God had called me to ministry, really got a hold of my life, and I got invited to be a part of planting a church in Austin, Texas. And it was a wild ride. It's 19 people in a living room.
Was it weird?
And it was very weird. And it was an invitation to be the youth pastor. Okay. And it was a crazy deal. And kind of when I said yes, the pastor said, "Awesome. Our youth ministry is 2 kids and a trampoline in the backyard. can't mess it up." Right. And this is a beautiful thing. I'd never heard about church planting. My context growing up was just a whole different kind of faith tradition. And so every church I'd ever attended had been there for hundreds of years. So this idea of starting something new was brand new to me. And just God did an incredible work. I mean, he did something in me. It was a catalyst for my faith. Really through that process of planting this church, my 2 parents came to faith in Jesus.
Wow.
And our first baptism services we ever had, I got to baptize both of them.
Bro,
and so it's crazy, right? So solidified something in me that I just knew, man, I love all churches, but there's nothing under the sun like starting a new work in a new place. And it's one of the best ways to reach somebody far from God is to plant a church in their community. And so I knew from that moment, like that church, just from a core team, and our first Sunday we ever had like 300 people show up, and just an incredible just moment and story in my life. And God showed me then, like, man, he gave me this passion. I want to plant a church one day. Having just done it, I was like, I am not ready to be that person.
Right.
And so really the last 13 years have been ministry experience and going, but the goal, the light at the end of the tunnel is I'm preparing to plant one day. And 7 years ago, I came south of Houston to a church that had a huge passion for church planting. And they were like, you tell us when, and we want to send you out. And so really that's where we are. January 1, it was like, here we go. And moved to Northwest Houston. So we're planting in Cypress, the northwest part of Houston. And first Sunday in February, we had our first core team meeting. So people who were building this church with us. And we got about 25 adults and about 10 kids, and kind of just off to the races here, just building a team of people. And we say we're just missionaries. Yeah. Our prayer right now is for more missionaries to reach this community. And our goal is to build that over the course of this year, and by the end of this year, have a public launch. But yeah, that's kind of where we are.
That's
Love
exciting.
Love it. So tell us a little bit about your heart for prayer in all this. Like, how does prayer play into your church planning? How do you, what heart do you have for prayer in your church, all that stuff?
Yeah, so I don't think I said either. We're planting Story Church is the name of our church. Yeah.
Right.
And the dream of church planting was birthed out of prayer. I kind of fell into it backwards, but the constant piece of my heart that was like feeling God leading me, there's always been prayer about that. God, tell me when. Lead us to when. And especially this last couple of years of God really showing us okay, now is the time. And part of it too is like we always thought we were going back to Austin. My wife is born and raised there. And so I think the process of getting to where we are has been so much a part of personal prayer. Okay, God, we were going to say yes, but now we need you to catch us. Yeah. Show us where. God, who? What particular neighborhood? God, who's going to come with us? And so I think for us, it's been a massive catalyst for prayer. It's like, I felt like I prayed regularly. I felt like I prayed. I could always have prayed more consistently or been more regular in it.
Yeah.
But I think something like jumping off of a cliff that is church planting, it's like necessity.
Right.
Okay, I need to, like, God, I need you.
Come on.
And how am I going to talk to? How I need to plead with you. I need to ask you to catch me. And so, man, prayer is such a massive part of that. And honestly, God is just. We're just on this wild ride right now of God has just continued to open doors, make connections, of bringing us people and opportunities. And just one of the things I keep telling our core group as we are on this journey is like, y'all, I'm not this smart. Like, let me tell you a story of what happened this week. Let me tell you this opportunity that's come up before us. Let me tell you about, this partnership or this other church or these people who are going to jump in with us. And I just continue to tell them, y'all, I'm not this smart. I'm not this capable. I'm not this much of a chess player.
Come on.
God's doing something. And there's like the simplest way to say it is we're riding a wave and I didn't make it. God is doing this. And so I think as a core team and as a church plant, it's like, y'all, we're not doing this. God is doing something amongst us. And so we need to be praying.
Come on.
Like, we need to be in communion with him and saying, God, what are you doing next? And why are you leading us this direction? And so, man, I think that just with all of the blessing, it's also come this deep humbling of, man, we're not doing this. Like, I couldn't have planned it this way. And just a reliance on prayer of like, God, okay, you got my attention.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Right. Yeah. And isn't that what prayer is just this expression of dependence? If you're not depending on the Lord, you're not praying. If you are depending on the Lord, you are praying. And I know the Lord's going to honor that in your church. And I believe, we're at this Plant Houston conference with HCPN, and that's the whole spirit of this entire network.
Yeah.
Is just this dependence, really radical. We're just finishing February, this month of prayer and fasting, where all these churches, hundreds of churches from all around the city are all united together to just depend on the Lord together and say that all of our goals are supernatural. We don't have the power in ourselves to accomplish them. Like Joseph, you're an example of what this network is trying to promote and pursue and support. Is just supernatural, radical dependence on the Lord to do the things only he can do, because our goals are not things that we can accomplish.
Yeah.
Just like you said, when you really think about, okay, I'm going to plant a church and we want to see the kingdom built, souls saved, and people grow up in Christ, like Joseph's not.
That's true.
What exactly did you go to school for to accomplish? You know what I'm saying? So I love your heart in that. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So let me ask you, Joseph, for our listeners who either are part of a church plant, like, hey, we're part of the team that you're talking about, that core team, or, praying for church planners, what would you say to them that they could be praying for?
Man, I think pray for more. And I think what I want to continue to remind people of is that you may be a church planter, and that's great and awesome. I'm glad you're listening. You might be somebody who's just attends a church, or you serve in some ministry. And I think I just want to continue, and I think that's kind of the heart of HCPN too. It's like, we're all church planters. And just because you attend a church or you've been there for years and you're like, yeah, church planting, I'm never going to jump out of this context, this neighborhood, this church. Man, but God may be calling you to be a planter. And that may be like jumping on a core team. That may be like, hey, let me start to pray or work with or support planting works or networks like HCPN, or that might look like you actually going. And I think I just want to. What I love about HCPN is it's bringing in. It's such a unique network, and there's so many people connected. And I think it's this pervasive spirit and message that we continually want to. There I don't know how many churches are here that are like, were planted 20 years ago, 15 years ago, but they're here.
Yeah.
And they're so bought in. And it's because it's like, it's this mentality of like, even if you're not actively planting, it's just like, we're all called to plant. We're all called to go to the one. And that looks different for every person. And there's a way that you, no matter where you are right now, can actively be involved in church planting.
Right.
wherever you are. And so that could look like reaching out to a church planter like me and saying, I want to pray for you. Like we have a list of, like a mailing list that we share stories and needs, but I also have a much smaller list of people that are like, man, they are prayer warriors,
active,
and I'm like, hey, I'm messaging them on a regular basis. I'm about to walk into this meeting. I'm about to sit down with the school. Hey, this is going on in our life. Hey, we're about to have our first gathering, and like my family is tanking. Like there's something going through. Like I feel like, I'm getting sick, and I just need you to help. Like,
Yeah.
and there's a smaller group of people that are just, here's how I can serve you. I can't come with you, but I can pray with you.
Yeah.
And it's just a beautiful thing. And so I think that's what I just want to say. You can be a church planter no matter where you are.
Right.
good.
Right. That's really good.
Yeah, and that's go and make disciples, right? So when you say church planting, you're talking about going and making disciples.
100%. Yeah.
That's the Great Commission. So just so everybody gets a biblical context for
Of
this
course.
idea, that's what we're talking about. So, and that's important to the Lord's heart. So just be invested in it, be invested in praying, be invested in giving, be invested in all those ways. Awesome. Well, Joseph, thanks so much for coming on.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks so
And
much.
if
for having
you're
me.
in Northwest,
Northwest Houston,
Cypress
yeah.
area, check out Story Church.
Yeah, mystorychurch.org.
That's right, mystorychurch.org. Thanks, guys. As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of Two or More, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button. Right now, we have Matt Lee. He is the director of the church planting residence. So tell us a little bit about that and your church planting journey.
Yeah. Again, my name's Matt, and I oversee the 3 different residencies that we have: the foundational, finishing, and fortifying. I really oversee the training portion of it, and the way I describe me and Chad Clarkson, who's the executive director, he oversees the partners, all the churches, and I oversee the planters. So,
Well, tell us what a residency is, because some of
Yeah.
us might not even know what that is.
yeah. Well, in some sense, we have 3 different, what I would rather call cohorts. The foundational is a cohort of people who are thinking about church planting. And it's a 9-month, once a month kind of thing where you get the basics of church planting. You're trying to discern with a mentor and a coach whether you're really called to plant a church. Towards the end of the foundational, then you do an assessment to see, whether you really are ready to plant a church with your spouse if you're married. And then you go into the finishing, which is an intensive twice a week, and you are planting a church, but you're doing with another cohort of people. And we are hoping that by the end of the residency that you're ready to plant. And then the third is the fortifying, which is for those who've already planted a church. And then you meet together to support one another, and you have a mentor who's a little bit more seasoned pastor or planter, and they help you along in the journey. So we want to try to help people from the very beginning towards ongoing, however much they need it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah. In terms of my personal journey, well, I would call myself, I was always the reluctant church planter. I went to seminary at Gordon Conwell after college. Thought I was just I started off as a youth pastor, then thought, okay, associate pastor, get a nice office and become a senior pastor of
The
a church.
career track.
Yeah. But then the Lord just thrust me into church planting without me even knowing it. A friend of mine who planted a church in Boston, his name is Sung Chan Ra, and he asked me to come along to help. And that I started helping plant churches. And in the past 30 years or so, I helped 5 different churches.
Wow.
2 as the lead planter, planted one as a lead planter in DC and LA.
Wow.
And then I tried to get out of church planting altogether. I got a PhD at Biola and thought I was going to be a professor. And then the Lord had other plans. Ended up, I was asked to head up as the director of church planting programs at Fuller Seminary. And so I did that for a while, taught church planting there. And then again, thought I could get away from church planting and a denomination called Eco Presbyterian. I got the honor of serving as a national church planting director there. And then long story short, I ended up back in the local church and at a church in Houston called First Pres Houston, and that was the very first church that I helped to plant churches, and they asked me to come and oversee their church planting. And after we had planted several churches, I got connected with HCPN and Chad, and that was at the time where First Pres said, well, we don't have any more planters right now. And so this was a good time for me to transition, and ended up at HCPN for the last 3.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from church planting to church planting to church planting to church planting.
Yep.
And every time it felt like a sneak attack from the
Yeah.
Lord. Just,
And my wife is the one who said, it's in your blood. You can't.
wow.
Yeah. And she still thinks I have 1 or 2 more plants left in me.
Oh, man.
Even though I'll be 53 this year. And I said, I think I'm done with it.
But you've thought that before.
Yeah.
I wonder if Paul ever said that. You know,
Yeah.
I think I'm dead.
I'm tired. I'm just tired.
Yeah. So it's actually my wife who's been the one prodding me to,
Yeah.
hey, this is your calling. This is what you're made for. So
Wow. Well, that's a gift, because then you can do it really unified.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
both believing in it.
yeah. And she's the one who's like spearheading. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like we were supposed to get Matt's wife on
Yeah,
here.
yeah. Yeah. Well, she was a missionary in Beijing for several years.
Wow.
So she is a missionary.
Wow.
She's really the
Yeah.
cross-cultural person.
I think maybe some of what you feel about your wife, I feel about mine, that I was like enamored with her. I just had so much admiration. Like she had been to places in the world for the sake of Christ, that it was like, wow. I was just trying to like graduate high school, and she was smuggling Bibles into China and stuff like this.
Yeah, she would have stayed in China if it wasn't the fact that we got married.
Wow.
And she came back for me. So
Wow.
Oh, praise God.
yeah.
Well, so since you've had so much involvement in church planting and those things, how have you seen prayer work as an essential element
Yeah.
to the growth of a church plant? Like, and I mean spiritual growth, it can be growing in number 2, but like the spiritual growth of a church plant, how do you kind of see that play out? Why is that important?
So prayer really is the heartbeat of healthy, effective church planting. And when I talk about prayer, I would just, call it closeness to Jesus, really.
Come on.
Because, for the planter, that saying, ministry flows out of not only who you are, but your intimacy with Christ. And really, so if you're not growing in intimacy with Jesus, you have really nothing to offer to your plant. And it's not going to be good for you or the plant if you're not growing in that area.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, in my experience of helping launch planters and planting myself, in the end, this is just my opinion, I think really it boils down to, can you as a planter really discern the voice of God and what he's wanting you to do, the next step that he wants you to take, and obey him. But in order to do that, you need to be close to Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think good, healthy church planners are those who can do that, who can just listen daily and sense what is God wanting me to do today? Where is he leading us? And it may be in a direction that you never thought, but when you obey it, that's when the fruit comes.
Yeah.
And so for the planter, prayer it's the heartbeat. And if you don't have that, if you don't have that closeness to Jesus, in the long term, it's not going to be very effective spiritually. And but also for the plant itself, there's the saying, when we work, we work. When we pray, God works. And so, I've seen many dynamic churches being planted. I've seen many dynamic planters. I've seen big growth of some churches, but if you don't have that element of prayer and that is essential part of that ministry, the question really is, how much eternal spiritual impact are you actually having?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
there are many people who can grow a crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the church growth days, you get a good preacher, good worship team, good children's ministry, and you can grow a large church.
Yeah.
But in the last few years, as you've seen, you know, it, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a healthy church or a healthy pastor,
Yeah.
and it can end up, in scandal and disaster.
Right. Which is really ultimately bad for Jesus's name.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is nobody sets out planning a church to bring dishonor
Yep.
on Jesus's name. But to your point, without the intimacy for Christ, the desire for Christ himself,
Yeah.
drawing near to him constantly, then you've got this gap
Yep.
between what your goals are and the way you actually live
Yep.
toward Christ.
And this is where, we're trying to push planters more towards, spiritual formation, emotional health, and all of these things, because that's going to be the foundation and the basis for long-term sustainable type of ministry, and getting away from all the hoopla, the numbers, um, and the push for metrics and things like that, though that's important some ways, right? Because you do, if you do want to have a sustainable church plant that pays a salary and overhead costs, yeah, you do need to have organizational skills and all that stuff, but in the end, that's not going to produce the type of people that you want. 'Cause, there's another saying, right? What you win them with is what you win them to. And
That's good.
and if you're going to win them with, great programs, great preaching, great all of this stuff, and what you're going to end up with is a bunch of consumeristic Christians,
Right.
and you're not going to form disciples of Christ. So
Yeah.
I think that's the move that we're trying to go towards.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's great.
That's so good. Yeah. And church planting is not for the faint of heart.
No.
So if you're going to church plant and you're not consistently in the secret place with the Lord, there's a pretty much 100% chance you will burn out,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
it's not going to really work for you long term.
yeah,
Yeah.
Right.
exactly.
Right. Yeah. And what I hear you saying is when you guys are looking at a person as a potential church planter, you're not evaluating him according to his giftedness. Like, are you called? Gifts matter. The Spirit gives the gifts to the church for the good of the church. They matter. But in terms of are you called to plant, you're not primarily looking at are you gifted. You're looking at are you dependent on the Lord.
Yeah,
Are you actively depending on the Lord? Which the only reason you depend on the Lord is because you know you're weak. You know you're inadequate. So then all the power is not whatever natural power you can muster, but the power of God flowing through you as you depend on him is so much more effective. So even the statement like church planting isn't for the faint of heart. It's like, well, right, because you have to have the endurance to cling to Christ constantly.
Yep.
It's not that you have to be this, battle-hardened, wise, super intelligent, strategic person. Like, yeah, that's not going to help you. You will flame out
yeah.
if you're really strong in all those areas, but you don't depend on Christ.
Yeah, and that's so when we try to discern who should plant a church, there's a grid that you look at, which is calling, character, competencies, and what I call congruence. That means everything coming together, including your spouse and church leaders and all that stuff. And before, I think the emphasis has been more on the competencies part. Are you gifted? Do you have what it takes? Do you have the preaching skills, organizational skills, and all that stuff?
Entrepreneurial.
But I would say, now the emphasis really is more on, your personal calling and your character, and included in that character is the intimacy with Christ, and so, just asking simple questions. What do you do for your devotional life? How consistent is it? Do you feel like you're growing in intimacy with God, or do you feel far away? And so, because the problem in the past, I think many times, is as long as they have the competencies, you can send them off. Yeah, they can work on their, relationship with Christ and all this other stuff. But as long as they have what it takes externally. But now I think the emphasis is rightly on the character and the calling. And as we know in the last few years, that's what will count.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
So good. So you train church planners.
Yep.
What kind of things do you train them in to cultivate as they're planting? Everybody wants praying people. They want a praying church if they want a biblical church, right? So how do you teach church planners to cultivate a culture of prayer in their church?
Yeah. Well, so beginning with our first cohort or residency, the foundational, it's 9 months. We spend the first half, the entire half, focusing on you as the planter and prayer,
Wow.
devotions, but included in that emotional health, relationship with your family, your spouse. We have wonderful pastors who come and talk about how they have boundaries, and so we don't even touch any of the practical stuff until we start in September, but we get to the practicals in January.
Wow.
Because we say, you need the first part first before you even think about the practical stuff.
Right.
Then when you get into the finishing, which is for people who are actually planting. So what we do is we have 2 days of training. 1 day is all of content information, the how-tos. The second day, which is on Thursdays, all we do is soul care. So we call it Soul Care Thursdays. There's no content. There's you come, and we have people coming in who facilitate sharing and prayer and taking care of your soul, and so we want to make sure that they're in a good place spiritually. So so what we say is just as important as content is the state of your soul, right? So we're doing that side by side for 9 months. So that's how we emphasize that. The other thing is, before we start, we have a retreat where we spend significant time in sharing and prayer at the beginning, at the end, and then even as the very first thing we tell the planter to do before you start gathering a core team and raising funds and all of that stuff is you need to cultivate a prayer team for you and your plant. That's the very first thing you do. So
Wow.
we require you to raise at least 100 prayer people
Wow.
to pray for you on a regular basis.
Come on. All right.
And personally, and that's really from my past experience, because one of my first plant that I led, which was I was sent by the church in Boston back to DC area where I grew up. They gave me a $600 check, and they said, "Good luck." All right? And
Wow.
I drove down with my possessions in my car, and they had no core team, no money, but there was 100 people praying for me
Wow.
Come on.
every single week, and some praying every single day,
Wow.
who committed to pray for me for at least the first 3 years. So I said, well, I'm going to go for it. And and I look back and I always say, that's the only reason why I was able to just make it through.
Yeah.
And why the church is still existing and flourishing today.
It wasn't the $600.
No, it was, and just from my background, I'm Korean American. So prayer is like, in the Korean church, you're required to go to early morning prayer. Some places it's 4 a.m, 5 a.m.
Wow.
So that's just part of your and your prayer meeting is the centerpiece of your church. So when I started the church in DC area, I started it the only way I knew how was with a prayer meeting. So I said, all right, I'm going to just gather some people and we're just going to pray. And that's all we did for the first 6 months. We looked
Wow.
at each other and they looked at me, And we said, what are we doing? And that back then we didn't have HCPN or anything.
Yeah.
So I didn't have any training.
Yeah.
But so we just said, well, let's just pray. And that's how we started the church.
That's so
And,
good.
And we always say that looking back, after I handed that church off to a friend of mine, the Tuesday night prayer meeting was the heartbeat of that church. And that was the only reason why God allowed it to grow the way it grew.
Yeah,
So
that's so good. What a testimony.
Wow, that's powerful. So what you're saying is 100 prayer warriors are worth a lot more than $600.
a lot more than $600,000. I would say.
Come on.
I mean,
Right.
it'd be
Come
great.
on.
It'd be great if you could get hundreds of thousands of dollars, but and that's where yeah. I mean, my experience, I think, colors a lot of the way that I want to train planters and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I've experienced it myself. I mean, just this interesting story. I mean, so everything we did in that plant was out of a prayer meeting. So we initially in DC, we thought we were going to be at one place. And then the Lord, during a prayer meeting, showed us that there's another place that we never thought of. But we obeyed. And as we did, I remember one of the interesting stories is we had, I think, 12 people at the time. And we called us to plant a church in Pentagon City, right next to the Pentagon. And I went around to all these different places and said, hey, we need to meet. We're a church. And each place, it was going to cost, $800 to $1,000 a week.
Wow.
It's a very affluent area. I went, but the Lord led me to this one hotel. And I said, Lord, provide. And the person came out and I said, hey, we need some rooms to meet for a church. And so she showed me and she said, so how much do you want it for? And a number came to my head and I said, 200 a month? And she said, sure.
Wow.
That's fine. And so it was from that, we started a church in 2 rooms and it grew. We basically filled out the entire conference room floor by the time I had departed.
Wow.
And so
for $50 a week.
yeah, and of course they charged more as we got bigger.
Right.
But
Sure.
But it was that's just an example of when you're dependent on Jesus and you birth a church out of prayer. Those are the exciting things that can happen, and there's countless stories of just God providing a check here, a check there, and
Yeah.
so anyways, that's why we value prayer.
Praise God.
That's so amazing. So last thing here. Let's say I'm a church planter and I come to you and I'm just so excited. I'm a church plant, What's the number one thing you'd tell me? If you could tell me anything, you have one conversation with me, what are you going to tell me is the most important thing?
To discern whether you should plant or not, or
No, that was kind of a general question. I'm going to plant. In my planting effort, if I could impart one bit of wisdom about planting to you, what would you tell me?
basically what I shared about my personal experience. Birth it out of prayer. Birth it out of
prayer.
And that personal, I would tell that person, you need to be with Jesus a lot. And so you should discern whether, but the other thing is be in prayer with spiritual leaders that can discern with you. And then as you gather a small group of people, birth it out of a prayer meeting. And then again, find 100 people who's willing. If you can find 100 people who believe in you enough that they're going to pray for you, you're in a good spot. And so, I mean, that's a good sense whether you're really called to plant or not. Because if you have 100 people saying, hey, yeah, we believe God is calling you to do this, and we're going to be behind you in prayer, there's a good chance you're going to do okay.
I love it.
Yep.
It's great.
Great. Very good.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for coming on.
Sure.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks.
As a reminder, the Prayer Culture Podcast is a ministry of Two or More, which is a crowd-funded ministry. So if you enjoy this content, please check out our website and giving page listed in the description. Also, when you have a second, hit the like and subscribe button.